I need to check the usenames file and then write the story. The usenames are Emma Caldwell, Linda, Sophie, Janelle, Rachel, Derek, Paul, Danny, Cara, Tyler, Aunt Diane, Melissa, Brooke, Nathan, Mom, Dad, Claire, Nadia, Audrey, Uncle, Gianna, Marcus, Aunt, Kevin, Mom, Dad, Vanessa, Connor, Abby, Dad, Ivy, Grammy, Joe, Garrett, Greg. Now, I'll write the story with completely new names following the analysis framework. I remember the exact moment I stopped trying. It wasn't dramatic. There was no slamming door, no tearful speech, no moment where I finally said everything I'd been swallowing for 31 years. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and I was standing at the kitchen sink in my apartment, rinsing a coffee mug, when my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my brother. Dad's toast tonight was legendary. Wish you'd been there. I set the mug down. I didn't respond. I just stood there with the water still running, and something inside me went very, very quiet. Let me back up. Growing up, my brother Liam was the one everyone talked about, not in a mean way. That's the thing. It was genuinely, enthusiastically, relentlessly positive. Liam made varsity soccer at 15. Liam got a partial scholarship to state. Liam had my father's jawline and my mother's social ease, and when he walked into a room, people just kind of tilted toward him, like plants toward a window. I'm Serena. I'm the older one by 4 years. I was the one who got decent grades and didn't cause problems and came home on time and never needed much. My parents weren't cruel. I want to be honest about that. They weren't the kind of parents you read about in horror stories. They just had a limited amount of wonder to spend, and most of it went to Liam. I told myself for years that it was fine. That's what older kids do, right? You mature faster, you need less, you become self-sufficient almost by accident, because the spotlight naturally shifts. I built a whole identity around not needing the spotlight. What I didn't realize until much later was that I'd also built a habit, a deep, stubborn, almost compulsive habit of trying to earn what he got for free. I graduated from college with a nursing degree and moved 40 minutes away to take a job at a regional hospital. I was 22. Liam was 18 and starting freshman year, and my parents threw him a party with a banner that said, "The future is bright." There was no party for my graduation. My mom made lasagna and my dad said he was proud of me. I told myself that was enough. I worked night shifts for 2 years because I needed the differential pay. I drove a 7-year-old Honda. I packed my lunches, kept my rent low, and by the time I was 25, I had a solid emergency fund and almost no debt. I was, by every measurable standard, doing fine. That's when my parents first asked me for money. It wasn't framed as asking. My dad called one Sunday and mentioned, kind of in passing, that the mortgage was running tight because the heating system had needed a full replacement that fall and they'd put it on credit. He wasn't complaining, he said. He was just mentioning it. He said they'd figure it out. I asked how much the credit card payment was. He told me. I said I could help for a couple months while they got back on their feet. He said, "Serena, you don't have to do that." But he didn't say no. I started transferring $800 a month into my parents' account. I told myself it was temporary. It wasn't temporary. 3 years. That's how long it went on before I fully understood what I'd signed up for. The $800 became a given. My mom stopped mentioning it except to occasionally say things are still so tight, which I had learned to interpret as, "Please don't stop." When I asked my dad once how their finances were overall, he said they were managing, then changed the subject to Liam's new job in sales. Liam, for his part, was not helping with the mortgage. Liam had student loans, which was fair. Liam had a nice apartment in the city, which was his business. Liam took my parents to dinner on their anniversary every year and always picked up the check, which I heard about in detail. I want to be honest, I didn't resent Liam at first. I knew my parents' finances weren't his responsibility any more than they were mine. I'd just chosen to help. That was my choice. What started to bother me was the invisibility of it. I was transferring nearly $10,000 a year into their account, and it existed in our family as this unspoken, unacknowledged current running beneath everything. My parents didn't talk about it. They didn't factor it in when they made decisions. When my mom mentioned they were thinking about redoing the back deck, I remember feeling a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. Not anger exactly, more like vertigo. I didn't say anything. I should have said something. Liam got engaged in the spring. Her name was Priya, and she was warm and funny, and I liked her immediately. The wedding was set for the following October, a venue outside the city, about 200 guests, the kind of event that costs somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 depending on who you ask. My parents announced, without any prior conversation with me, that they were paying for it. I found this out not in a phone call, not in a family meeting, but at Sunday dinner in June, when my dad made a toast to Liam and Priya and said, "We couldn't be prouder, and we want you both to have the wedding of your dreams. Whatever you need, we're here." The table erupted. Priya covered her mouth. My brother looked at my dad with this expression I'd never seen on him before. Something unguarded and genuinely moved, and my dad clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You've earned this, son." I sat there holding my wine glass. "You've earned this." I turned that phrase over in my head for weeks. I didn't ask how they were planning to pay for it. I told myself I didn't want to know. But I'm a numbers person by nature. You have to be. In nursing, you are always tracking and calculating, and I knew what I knew. My parents' income hadn't changed. The mortgage was still tight enough that I was covering $800 a month, and now they were pledging tens of thousands of dollars toward a wedding. I called my mom in July and asked carefully how they were thinking about the finances for the wedding. She said they had some money set aside. I asked if that meant they wouldn't need my help with the mortgage anymore. There was a pause. She said, "Serena, your father and I have always handled our finances ourselves. We appreciate your help, but we don't want you to feel obligated." I almost laughed. I had been transferring $800 a month for 3 years. She had never once told me to stop. I said, "Okay, Mom," and I kept sending the money. The wedding was in October. It was beautiful. The venue was in October. It was beautiful. The venue was a converted farmhouse with string lights and a live band and a raw bar during cocktail hour. I sat at a table with cousins I saw twice a year, drank good wine, and watched my brother dance with Priya like he'd been practicing for it his whole life. My parents were radiant. My mom had a new dress. My dad gave a speech that made half the room cry. Near the end of the night, my dad gathered the immediate family for a private toast. Just us, me, Liam, Priya, my mom, a couple of aunts and uncles. He raised his glass. He talked about Liam's journey, his character, his future. He talked about Priya like she'd already been their daughter for years. Then he said, "You two are everything we ever hoped for in this family. This wedding is our gift to you. Because you deserve to start your life together knowing how loved you are." Everyone drank. My dad looked around the circle and his eyes landed on me for just a moment, warm, a little glassy from the champagne, and then moved on. That was it. That was my moment in the speech. A glance. I smiled and drank my champagne and said nothing. On the drive home, I did the math. The wedding had cost, based on what my mom had mentioned in passing over the months of planning, somewhere around $35,000. I had contributed, over 3 years of $800/month payments, approximately $28,800 toward their mortgage, money that, if I'm being precise about it, had freed up exactly the cash flow they needed to save for a wedding I was not the subject of. I don't know why it took me until that car ride to put it together clearly. Maybe I'd been avoiding it. Maybe I'd wanted to believe my own story, that I was just helping, that I didn't expect anything, that I was above keeping score. But sitting in that car in my bridesmaid dress with my heels on the passenger seat, I understood something with absolute clarity. I had funded that wedding. Not intentionally, not with my name on anything. But I had been subsidizing my parents' finances for 3 years so that they could redirect their own money toward Liam's life. I had been the financial buffer that made the gift possible. And not one person in that farmhouse with string lights and a raw bar knew it. I drove the rest of the way home in silence. I didn't make any decisions that night. I'm not the kind of person who acts on a feeling while it's still raw. I've always been better at waiting. a quality that served me in nursing and cost me in personal relationships. I let things settle. I went back to work. I picked up 2 extra shifts in November. I transferred the $800 in December like I always did, and I watched it leave my account and felt, for the first time, something that wasn't complicated at all. Tired. Just tired. I thought about what I actually wanted, not what I'd been trained to want. Approval, inclusion, the sense that I'd contributed enough to finally matter, but what I actually, concretely needed for my own life. I was 31. I had been helping my parents for 3 years at the cost of my own savings goals. I wanted to buy an apartment. I had been putting that off. In January, I stopped the transfer. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. I just didn't send the money. I told myself I'd wait and see if anyone noticed. My dad called 3 weeks later. He didn't ask how I was. He said the mortgage auto payment had bounced and the bank had flagged it. He said things were a little tight and he wanted to know if I could help them out for a couple months. I said, "Dad, I've been helping for 3 years." He said, "I know, and we're so grateful. But right now," I said, "I know. And we're so grateful. But right now," I said, "I know. But I need to step back." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Serena, this is a really hard time for us." I said, "I understand." He said, "We're your parents." I said, "I know, Dad." And then there was a silence between us that said more than either of us put into words. He was waiting for me to fold. I'd always folded. For 31 years, not folding had never been a real option in our family. Not for me. I said, "I hope things get easier. I love you both. Good night." And I hung up. My mom called the next day. She cried. She said she didn't understand what had changed, that I'd always been so generous, that she was scared about the house. I sat on my couch and listened and felt my heart break a little. Because I do love my mother. That's the part that nobody tells you about in these stories. You love the people who hurt you. You can love them completely and still know that some things have gone too wrong for too long. I said, "Mom, I've been sending you $800 a month for 3 years. I helped make the mortgage payments that freed up the money you used for the wedding. I'm not angry. I don't want to fight. I just can't keep doing it." She said, "We never asked you to." That one landed. I won't pretend it didn't. She was right, technically. They had never sat me down and asked. I had offered, once, and then kept going. But she also knew. She had to have known. That I had kept going because every time I'd tried to pull back even slightly, she'd say something about how tight things were. That's not the same as asking. But it's not nothing either. I said, "I know. And I'm stepping back now." What followed was the longest silence I'd ever experienced with my family. 3 weeks without a call, which had never happened in my adult life. I texted my mom twice. Short, cheerful, nothing about money. And she responded briefly. I texted Liam to ask how the honeymoon was. He sent back 3 photos and a thumbs up. I went apartment hunting. I found a place, a 2-bedroom condo about 15 minutes from the hospital, with a balcony and south-facing windows and more light than any home I'd ever lived in. I put in an offer. It was accepted. I told my parents in a group text because I wanted them to know I was okay. I said, "Some good news. I'm buying my first place. Closing in 6 weeks." My mom replied, "That's great, honey." My dad replied, 20 minutes later, "Congrats." Liam sent a gif of someone doing a little dance. That actually made me laugh. I signed the closing papers on a Thursday afternoon in April. My real estate agent brought champagne in little plastic cups and made me take a photo holding the keys on the front steps. I looked at that photo later that night sitting on the floor of my empty new living room. I didn't have furniture yet, just an air mattress and a lamp. And I thought about all the money I'd sent my parents over the years. I could have been angry. For a while I had been. But sitting there in that empty room with the light coming through the south-facing windows, what I felt was something quieter. Something that took me a minute to name. Free. My dad called in May. His voice was different, Not angry, not demanding, but genuinely tired. He said they'd been talking to a financial advisor and had worked out a plan to refinance. He said things were going to be okay. He said he was sorry if he'd ever made me feel like my contribution wasn't seen. That if was doing a lot of work in that sentence. And we both knew it, but I said, "Thank you, Dad. I appreciate you saying that." He asked if he could come see the new place sometime. I said yes. My mom came with him the following Sunday. I made coffee and we sat on the balcony and talked for 2 hours. About work, about Liam and Priya, about the neighborhood, about nothing important. It was the most normal conversation we'd had in years. Before they left, my mom stood in the living room and looked around and said, "You did this all yourself." It wasn't an apology. I don't think she's capable of the version of it I would have wanted. But I heard something in it, a recognition, small and late and imperfect, but real. I said, "Yeah, Mom, I did. There are things I wish I'd done differently. I wish I'd named what I was doing from the beginning. Not just in my own head, but out loud. I wish I'd said, 'I'm happy to help, but let's talk about what the plan is and what this means for both of us.' I wish I hadn't spent 3 years waiting to be noticed for something I deliberately hidden. But here's what I know now that I didn't know at 28. Quietly holding things together doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible. And the people who love you, really love you, will not assume you're fine just because you haven't complained. You have to tell them what you need. You have to be willing to stop when stopping is the only thing that will make any of this real. I stopped sending the money and my parents' mortgage survived. They figured it out. The way people figure things out when they have no other choice. The house didn't fall. Nobody lost anything that couldn't be recovered. But I got something I hadn't had in a very long time. A room of my own, with south-facing windows and no one else's debt in my account. That's enough. For right now, that's more than enough. If you've been that person in your family, the one who holds things up quietly, who steps in before anyone has to ask, who tells yourself you don't need credit because you're the responsible one, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to stop. Not because they're bad people. Not because you've stopped loving them. But because your financial stability is not a resource that exists for other people to draw from, without acknowledgement, without conversation, without gratitude. You are a person, not a backup plan. And the apartment with the south-facing windows? It's waiting for you too. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has reached. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in this story. Not the events, but the mechanics underneath them. Because when you strip everything away, what this really is a story about cause and effect playing out so slowly that nobody saw it coming. Including me. For 3 years I made a choice. Every month, quietly, I covered a gap that nobody else was filling. I told myself I was doing it out of love, and that was partly true. But I was also doing it because somewhere deep down I believed that if I was useful enough, indispensable enough, invisible enough in just the right way, I would eventually be seen. That's not love. That's a transaction with terms I never said out loud. And transactions with unspoken terms always come due eventually. What I didn't understand back then is that how you give matters as much as what you give. I gave without clarity, without boundaries, without ever sitting down and saying, here is what I can do, here is where it ends. I handed my parents a financial lifeline with no expiration date and then felt hurt when they assumed it had no expiration date. That's not their failure alone. That's mine too. And Liam, I don't think he ever knew. That's the strangest part to sit with. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't calculating. He just lived his life and received what was offered. The wedding, the toast, the pride on my father's face, none of that was taken from me. It was just never given. There's a difference. And learning to see that difference clearly was one of the harder things I've had to do. What changed me wasn't stopping the transfers. It was the moment I made the decision without apologizing for it. That's where the real shift happened. Saying I need to step back without following it with, but I feel terrible, but I'll reconsider. But please don't be upset with me. That was the thing. Holding the line when my dad called. Sitting with my mom's silence for 3 weeks and not filling it with another $800 just to make the discomfort go away. Resilience isn't loudness. It's not a confrontation or a speech. Sometimes it's just deciding, quietly, that you are done subsidizing your own invisibility. And then actually being done. The apartment with the south-facing windows. I think about it now as the physical proof of what happens when you redirect your own resources back toward your own life. That's not a punishment for anyone. It's just what becomes possible when you stop giving from a place of fear. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from this, it's that integrity means being honest about what you're doing and why. With other people, yes. But first with yourself. I wasn't honest with myself for 3 years. I called it generosity when it was partly need. I called it strength when it was partly avoidance. The day I got honest, everything got harder, and then, slowly, better. You don't have to be the one who holds it all together. You just have to be the one who tells the truth.